Welcome to Revenge Report. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Let's dive in. They said I was the future. That's what one of the press liaisons whispered as I stepped up to the podium, the light slicing through the darkened conference room, picking me out like a target. I smiled anyway. After all, I'd learned how to perform. My name is Caroline Lynn. I'm 43 years old. I live in Reston, Virginia, and I've spent the last 2 decades making things that fly higher, faster, and smarter than most people will ever know. This time, I'd done something that mattered, something that might keep people safe. So, for once, they gave me a plaque and a microphone. The Defense and Aerospace Executive Summit wasn't meant to be public, but everyone who mattered was there. Top contractors, generals, senators, media contacts, and investors, all packed into a windowless room with cold coffee and sharper smiles. The recognition ceremony was a formality, but the kind of formality that decides careers. I'd like to think. That's when the door slammed open. Every head in the room turned. She walked in like she belonged there, though she'd never belonged anywhere quietly. Neon green jacket, platform boots, wild hair piled high like she was heading to a rave, not a defense summit. I didn't have to see her face to know. I knew by the silence that fell, the kind that's louder than shouting. Mia. My sister. She didn't slow down, just stomped straight up the aisle toward the stage like she had rehearsed it. She locked eyes with me, then turned to the room. This woman, she said loud and crystal clear, has been stealing credit since we were kids. Don't let the suit fool you. She's just a bully in expensive heels. Someone laughed, thinking it was a stunt. Then she kept going. She made my life hell growing up, took everything from me, friends, attention, even our father's approval. And now she gets this? This award? For what? For lying better than the rest of you? A dozen security officers froze, unsure if this was a protest or a meltdown. The reporters started filming. I felt the room change, that slow-motion horror, as every ounce of professionalism cracked. Mia, I said into the mic, quiet but firm, please leave. She stepped up to the platform, close enough for me to see the mascara streaking under her eyes, and then, with both hands, she shoved me. Hard. I didn't fall. My heel caught the edge of the platform and I staggered, but I stayed upright. Gasps rippled through the room. Someone shouted. Cameras clicked in rapid bursts. I straightened slowly and stared at her, my pulse thundering in my ears. That's when David Rourke moved. He stood up from the second row, face unreadable. Enough, he said, voice like steel. This is Caroline Lynn. She is my partner, professionally and personally. You don't speak to her like that? You don't touch her. He turned to the security team. Remove her now. Mia's face twisted, but she didn't fight. She just smiled, the kind of smile that says this isn't over, and let them pull her away. My hands were shaking, but I gripped the podium again. The applause never came. The award plaque sat on the edge, meaningless. Partner, he'd said it with the weight of fact, not just a workplace rumor, not just speculation. Partner. Everyone in the room heard it, everyone wrote it down, but all I could feel was the echo of Mia's fingers pushing against my shoulder, like the past had finally come to collect. The speech never finished. The plaque was handed off. The summit moved on. But nothing was the same, not after that. And I knew as I walked off that stage, I hadn't seen the last of her. The hotel lobby was cold in that quiet, over-air-conditioned way most upscale places are. Clean white marble floors, oversized armchairs no one ever truly relaxed in. I sat in the corner near the fake fireplace with a cup of decaf that tasted like paper, jacket still buttoned. I couldn't stop shivering. But it wasn't the room. That kind of public collapse doesn't leave your body quickly. I stared down at my hands, still steady, though I didn't feel steady at all. I'd given speeches in defense briefings and war rooms. I'd negotiated contracts while under surveillance. But I'd never been touched on stage like that. And not by a stranger, by her. It hadn't been spontaneous. I could see that now. Mia had waited for that moment, calculated it. She always did. I'd spent most of my life making excuses for her, telling myself she didn't mean it, that she just felt left out, or lost, or bruised by how different we were. I used to think I could outgrow it, that if I just stayed focused and quiet and disciplined, it would burn itself out. But Mia didn't burn out. She built her personality around the idea that I was the villain, and I let her. The image came back sharp, her voice cutting through the auditorium like a knife. She made my life hell. She stole everything, and the shove, Not hard enough to knock me over, just enough to humiliate me. But it wasn't the shove that kept echoing in my chest. It was the belief behind it. The deep conviction in her voice. Like she'd waited years to say it, she had. My father's funeral came back to me, uninvited. Mia showed up in a neon pink dress and patent leather boots, like she was attending a nightclub. My mother had looked stunned, but said nothing. Mia had grinned, sat in the front row, and during the eulogy, rolled her eyes every time I spoke. Later, when I gently asked her why she came dressed like that, she'd laughed and said, "Because I knew you'd come as a sermon." That was always the game. I built walls, she threw paint, I followed rules, she lit matches. Then she'd cry and tell everyone I was the cold one, that I stole the spotlight just by existing. There was one night, years ago, some Thanksgiving after too much wine, where she cornered me in the kitchen and said, "You follow rules because you're afraid to be seen. That's your whole problem, Caroline. You hide behind checklists." I'd never responded. I never pushed back. I was always the grown-up. But maybe that was the problem. I thought silence was strength. I thought professionalism was armor, and she knew that. That's why she shoved me, because she knew I wouldn't shove back. I looked down at my hands again, still steady, still quiet. But maybe that was about to change. The elevator doors hadn't even closed before I heard his voice. "Caroline." I turned. David Rourke stood alone at the end of the corridor, hands in his pockets, tie loosened. His badge still clipped to his jacket like none of this had just exploded across half the defense industry's press pool. "Security walked her out through the side lot," he said quietly. "No cameras." I nodded, unsure what to do with my hands. I ended up folding them tightly in front of me like I was waiting to be debriefed. I wasn't ready for this. Not the apology, not the questions, not the word he had used. "Partner, I appreciate what you did," I said carefully. He raised an eyebrow. "Which part?" "The part where you kept things from escalating, the part where you made it stop." A beat passed. Then he tilted his head. "And the part where I called you my partner?" There it was. I tried to sound neutral. Was that for optics? He didn't flinch. It was for control. The room was spiraling. She needed to be undermined fast, with authority. And I knew that word would do it. I nodded once. It worked. But that wasn't the only reason. The hallway went still. My pulse started pounding in my throat. "I didn't say it lightly," he added. "I said it because it was already true." That word, partner, had followed me down the elevator, across the lobby, into this hall. I hadn't let myself replay it, but now it was here again, out loud, still alive. "You didn't think I could handle her?" I asked, not accusing, just needing to know. "I knew you could," he said, "but I didn't want you to have to. Not alone." I swallowed hard. That hit deeper than I expected. I had always been alone. That was the deal I made with myself. Be excellent. Be composed. Be above it. Be so sharp they can't touch you. But Mia touched me. She shoved me and the whole room saw it. And then David spoke. Not as my supervisor, not as a press statement, but as something else, something harder to name. "I didn't mind it," I admitted quietly. "You saying it?" He looked at me for a moment, and in that moment there was no summit, no cameras, no fallout, just us. "Caroline," he said gently, "you've stood alone a long time. Maybe it's time you don't have to." I didn't answer, not out loud, but I didn't walk away either. It came in a thick manila envelope, hand-delivered and signed for by the receptionist outside my office. No sender. Just a white label with my name typed in small, perfect print. I opened it standing up. The first thing I saw was the seal. Internal Ethics Committee, Defense Clearance Division. Not external, not federal, but big enough. Inside, a letter of inquiry, formal and sterile. Allegations have been raised regarding abuse of positional power, retaliation, and potential coercion within a mixed-gender supervisory relationship. This preliminary inquiry seeks to determine. The words blurred. I sat down. The complaint was signed, Mia Lin. I flipped the pages too fast, heart hammering, and then I saw what she had sent. Not just a statement, a dossier. Carefully printed screenshots, old photos, transcripts of text messages I never sent, email drafts that looked vaguely familiar but weren't mine. A photo of me and David at a conference dinner 5 years ago, cropped to look like we were holding hands. A journal entry in shaky print, supposedly mine, talking about manipulating team members into obedience. The entire thing was a performance. but to someone unfamiliar with context, it read like a slow, hidden spiral of misconduct. She hadn't filed a complaint about the shove, she'd used the shove as evidence. Evidence of a long-running psychological campaign, one where she was the victim and I was the cold, calculated sister climbing over her broken body to reach success. And David, he wasn't just mentioned, he was accused. They'd pulled a quote from his personnel record, something about overlapping judgment and emotion, and turned it into a narrative. That he advanced my career in exchange for personal companionship, that he shielded me, that our relationship created a climate of favoritism and exclusion. I dropped the packet on my desk. For a full minute, I just stared at it. Then I called David. He answered on the second ring. Hey, everything okay? She filed a complaint, I said. My voice sounded strange to me. To the board. He paused. What kind of complaint? The kind with forged evidence, the kind that names you too. Silence. David, I said. She didn't do this in a week. She's been building this for years. He didn't speak right away. Then, are you sure it's her? She signed it. More silence. I could picture him running a hand over his face. Of course she did. She's not just trying to humiliate me, I said slowly. She's trying to wipe us both out. I thought about the speech, the shove, the way she let herself be dragged out like she had nothing left to lose. It hadn't been a public breakdown. It had been a trigger. This was the trap. The moment David defended me, publicly, emotionally, she had what she needed to twist. I have to report this up, I said. I know, he said quietly. I'll get ahead of it on my end. I wanted to say more. I wanted to ask if he was scared, if he regretted saying the word partner, if he wished he'd stayed in his seat. But I didn't, because I already knew the answer. We had walked right into it, me with my silence, him with his loyalty, and Mia had been waiting. It started with the emails, not the dramatic kind. No subject lines marked urgent or confidential, just silence. Meetings I'd normally lead were rescheduled without me. Memos were rerouted, someone else forwarded the agenda for next quarter's launch review, someone junior to me, who didn't even look me in the eye in the break room. I told myself it was just procedural, temporary. Nothing had been decided yet. Then David's office was emptied. No notice, no press release, no acknowledgement. One morning, I passed his glass door and saw the desk bare, his nameplate gone, just like that. I called HR. They said he'd been placed on administrative review during the inquiry. No further comment. That night, I sat in my car in the firm's underground garage for nearly 20 minutes, engine off, hands on the wheel. Not crying, just quiet. By the end of the week, I wasn't copied on the strategic realignment memo. I had written the first 3 drafts of it. My access to the internal data share was restricted for auditing purposes. 2 of my direct reports stopped checking in, and Julian Reyes, my closest technical ally for almost 6 years, stopped eating lunch with me. I cornered him in the lab after hours. You haven't returned my last 3 texts, I said flatly. Julian looked up from his monitor, guilt already in his eyes. I know, I'm sorry. So why are you avoiding me? He exhaled. Look, I don't think you did anything wrong, Caroline. I really don't. But people are nervous. This thing with your sister, the ethics complaint, the rumors about you and Rourke. I didn't flinch. There's nothing unethical going on. I believe you, he said quickly. But it's not about belief. It's about visibility. Risk. Risk of what? Having lunch with me? He looked down at his keyboard. That said more than anything. I left him there, blinking at the screen like he might find the right answer in the code. Over the next 2 weeks, the walls kept shrinking. No one accused me outright. No one shouted. That would have been easier in a way. Instead, I was gently excluded, muted on group threads, walked past in hallways. Once, I stepped into a conference room I had booked, only to find a different meeting in progress, one I used to lead. They didn't even look surprised to see me. I wasn't being judged. I was being erased. Even the security guards at the front desk stopped smiling when I walked in. And the worst part? I understood why. In a high-clearance world, perception is liability. Even a whiff of impropriety sends people running. Mia knew that. She didn't need to prove anything. She just needed to make it believable enough to stall me, long enough for everyone else to quietly step away. They weren't firing me. They didn't have to. They were building a reality where I no longer belonged, where I'd leave on my own, and it was working. The call came at 1:13 a.m. I was still awake. I stared at the screen. An unknown number, Virginia area code. For a second, I debated letting it go to voicemail. Then something in me said, pick up. Hello. A pause. Then, Caroline, it's Nathan Chen. I sat up straighter. Nathan? Mia's ex. You probably don't want to hear from me, but listen, I'm not calling to talk about her. Not in the way you think. I didn't say anything. I'm in a custody fight, he continued. It's messy. I hired a digital investigator a couple months ago. We've been digging through everything. Her socials, burner accounts, deleted messages, looking for anything that could prove instability, manipulation, you name it. I still didn't speak. My pulse picked up, and then your name started showing up, in ways that didn't make sense. Texts between Mia and someone named Cass talking about timing the spiral. Files labeled Stage 3, Summit. References to a push being enough to tip the narrative. I closed my eyes. She set you up, he said bluntly. On purpose. I've got a screen recording of her laughing about it, saying all she needed was for you to snap, just once, in front of cameras. People already think she's cold. If she shoves back, she's done. That's what she said. My throat tightened. I'm sending it all over, he said. Recordings, screenshots, emails, timestamps, everything you need to clear your name. Why now? I finally asked. He sighed. Because I've seen what she does when she feels invisible. And this was next level. If she's willing to burn down her own sister's life to feel seen, what's she going to do to my kid when he doesn't act the way she wants? I let the silence stretch. She picked the wrong person, I said finally. She thought I'd take it, that I'd fold and disappear. She counted on you staying quiet, he said, like always. The files hit my inbox 10 minutes later. It wasn't just a smoking gun. It was an entire case file, messages organizing the sabotage like a campaign, a spreadsheet with exposure points and optics strategies, a list of suggested journalists to tip anonymously, and the audio, Amia's voice light and gleeful. All I need is one snap, just one crack in that perfect little mask. She doesn't even have to hit me. She just has to look furious and they'll believe it. The cold ones always break loud. I played it 3 times. Then I sat very still. I didn't feel vindicated. Not yet. What I felt was clarity, sharp, cold, and unshakable. She hadn't just tried to ruin my career. She had studied me, tracked me, designed a demolition, and waited years to trigger it. But now I had something she never expected. Proof. And I wasn't going to use it for revenge. I was going to use it for truth. The decision came in a short email. All allegations have been reviewed and found unsubstantiated. No formal action will be taken. Thank you for your cooperation during this process. That was it. No explanation. No apology. Just a polite shrug from the same system that nearly swallowed me whole. I sat at my desk for a while, staring at the screen. My hands didn't shake. I didn't cry. I didn't smile either. The truth had cleared my name, but it hadn't cleared the damage. David's clearance was reinstated the next day, but he didn't return. He sent a quiet resignation letter to the board and left the same way his office had, quietly, efficiently, without ceremony. I called him once, it rang until voicemail. The morning after his resignation, I walked past the wall of leadership portraits in the West Wing lobby. Mine used to hang third from the top, right between our chief legal officer and head of systems engineering. Now it was gone, not replaced, just missing. A clean blank space. I stopped and stared at it for a moment. Nobody else in the lobby did. People kept moving, like it had always been that way. My badge still worked, my email was still active. Technically, I was still a senior executive. But the meetings stopped coming. The strategy sessions I used to run were reassigned to people 2 levels below me. Memos arrived with my name misspelled or omitted altogether. My direct reports now met with someone else on Tuesdays. I saw them coming out of a conference room, laughing quietly, eyes avoiding mine. I started sitting in on junior development briefings just to stay involved. No one asked me to. No one stopped me. But I noticed how the engineers straightened up when I entered, the way people do when someone they've already decided is radioactive walks into the room. Even Julian avoided me now. I didn't blame him. I wasn't toxic, just inconvenient. Eventually, I stopped trying to reinsert myself. I stopped checking for invites that weren't coming. Instead, I started saying yes to speaking requests. Lectures, panels, guest seminars on leadership and ethics. The kinds of things I used to decline because I didn't have time. Now, I had time. I gave a talk at MIT titled Command Under Scrutiny, another one at the Naval Research Lab on resilience in ethical storms. People listened. They took notes. Some came up after to thank me. Others emailed long questions about what it meant to survive without retaliation. No one asked about the summit, or Mia, or David. And no one at the firm said anything when I swapped out my project clearance for a visiting lecturer badge. It was like they were relieved, like they'd been hoping I'd choose the off-ramp myself. I did, not because I lost, but because the battle had moved, and winning it meant fighting somewhere else. I didn't know she'd be there. The hospital room smelled like bleach and flowers, the kind of sterile sweetness that clings to skin. I was there to visit our mother, who'd fallen and fractured her hip 2 nights before. I hadn't spoken to her much since the inquiry ended. Just short, polite calls. Check-ins. Routine. But when I stepped into the room, Mia was already there. She sat in the armchair next to the bed, half curled into herself, hair flat, eyes ring dark. No makeup, no performance, just Mia, like I hadn't seen her in years. Our mother was asleep, tubes running from her arm to the IV drip, her chest rising and falling slowly. The beeping machines filled the silence between us. I didn't say anything. I thought maybe she wouldn't either. But after a moment, Mia looked up. Her voice was low. "She asked for you earlier," she said. "Didn't remember I was already here." I nodded, not stepping farther in. "I'm not here to fight," she added. "Good," I said quietly. She looked back at Mom, her fingers twisted around a paper cup. "You won," she said after a long pause. "They cleared you. Everyone saw what I did." "I didn't win," I said. "I survived." She nodded like she already knew. Another silence passed. Then, without looking at me, Mia said, "You didn't try to be the hero. You just were. That's why I hated you." I didn't respond. I didn't move. "I didn't know how else to matter," she said, voice catching for the first time. "So I tried to wreck you." That was the only language I had left. My chest tightened, not with pity, but with something older, something closer to grief. This wasn't an apology, it wasn't confession, it was a surrender. "I'm not here for forgiveness," Mia said. "I don't expect it." "Good," I said again. We both stared at the bed, at the frail woman in it, the only witness left to the beginning of everything. "I always thought you stayed quiet because you were cold," Mia whispered. "Now I think maybe you were just trying to protect something I couldn't see." She didn't cry. Neither did I. I stepped closer to the bed, reached for Mom's blanket, pulled it up to her chin. My fingers brushed Mia's for a second. Brief, barely there, and then I did something I didn't plan. I placed a hand on her shoulder. Firm, not soft. She flinched, just barely, then stilled. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. That was the ceasefire, not a reunion, not a healing, just a quiet, final decision not to continue the war. When I left the room, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The battle was over, and this, choosing not to keep bleeding for people who wanted my collapse, this was peace. The envelope was simple. White, no logo, no federal seals. Just my name in clean serif font, tucked between credit card offers and a flyer about local gardening tips. I almost threw it away. Inside was a letter. Thick cream paper signed in blue ink. The first line read, "We are pleased to extend an invitation to serve as Deputy Director of the Civilian Military Ethics Advisory Board, effective this summer." I reread it twice. No press, no leaks, just an offer, a real one, not a favor, not a consolation prize, a position of meaning, built not on saving face, but on shaping futures. The second paragraph made me sit down. "Your nomination was submitted by David Rourke, accompanied by a personal letter. His words about your integrity, restraint under pressure, and leadership in uncertainty were decisive." I blinked hard. My throat felt thick. I hadn't spoken to David in weeks. After he left, he vanished. No email, no announcement, no trail. I'd assumed he'd gone underground, maybe back to the private sector, maybe somewhere quieter. I didn't know if he'd meant to disappear or just needed to. But he hadn't vanished completely. I folded the letter slowly and stared out the kitchen window. Spring had finally cracked the edges of the city. Tree buds just starting to bloom. The sidewalks scattered with petals and pollen. I hadn't noticed until now. Later that afternoon, I walked the long loop around the Capitol Mall, past tourists and lunching interns, watching life unfold without knowing I was watching it. The world moved on, quietly, stubbornly, and I moved with it. That night, I drafted my response. Thank you for the opportunity to serve. I accept the nomination with gratitude and humility. I do not seek to be comfortable. I seek to make the truth livable. For the next generation of leaders who will inherit the systems we are too afraid to change. No bitterness, no triumph, just direction. I saved the draft. Then opened the PDF attached to David's letter of nomination. His signature scrawled at the bottom, but the paragraph above it was what caught me. She did not retaliate, she did not bend. She held the line not just for herself, but for the principles we're supposed to protect. Caroline Lynn is not just capable. She is what the future requires. That line stayed with me for hours. He didn't write about our partnership, not once. No mention of rumors, of sabotage, of how close we came to ruin. He wrote about what I did when no one was watching, and that, more than any clearing of my name, told me I hadn't lost everything. Somewhere, in the middle of collapse, someone had still seen me clearly, and now I had a job to do. Not a comeback, a next chapter. The lights dimmed, and a hush fell over the auditorium. I stepped up to the podium, the same kind I'd stood behind at the summit months ago, but this time the faces in the crowd were different. Younger, earnest, students and new engineers, a sea of fresh ambition and nervous hope. No defense contractors, no press, no shadows. Just the next generation, waiting to understand what leadership might look like in a world full of noise. I didn't read from notes. I'm not here to talk about scandal, I said. I'm here to talk about survival. Some heads lifted, surprised. I didn't survive because I shouted the loudest, I continued. I survived because I endured. Because I chose, every day, not to become what tried to break me. There was no dramatic flair to it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't lean in. I just said the truth plainly. When people question your value, when they doubt your ethics, your integrity, your right to be in the room, don't rush to prove them wrong. Stand still. Do the work. Let time do the talking. A young woman near the front raised her hand. She couldn't have been older than 22. Crisp blue blazer. Wide eyes. How did you survive when no one believed you? She asked. When everyone pulled away? I paused for a moment before answering. Because I never stopped believing in myself, I said. And because I understood something a little late, but just in time. People might steal your spotlight, but they can't steal your light. You don't lose it unless you hand it over. She nodded slowly. I wrapped the talk soon after. No big finale, no applause line, just a quiet closing. Don't confuse loudness with strength. Strength is what's still there when everything else goes quiet. The applause came anyway. Not thunderous, but real. Afterward, a few students came up to thank me. One handed me a note, handwritten, folded in half. You helped me feel less afraid of failing with dignity. That hit harder than any award ever had. When I walked out of the building, the sun had just started to dip. The sky was soft, streaked with gold and gray. I crossed the street slowly, boots clicking against the pavement, shoulders loose for the first time in months. I reached up and touched the old watch on my wrist. It was my father's. I'd worn it on the day of the summit, and I hadn't taken it off since. Not for luck, not for memory, for anchor. The city around me buzzed. Cars, voices, life, but I was calm, whole. Not because they saw me again, but because I saw myself. Finally, fully, and I was still standing.